Welcome back to Chapter 2. Let's get right to it with some basic map use. So let's do a quick basic tour of the map. You can pan by dragging your finger. You can also, with the new software, zoom in and out by pinching. On this simulator, you must use the in out button. Anytime you hit back, it recenters on your current position. As you zoom out, less details are shown. As you zoom in, more details are shown. If you touch the menu button, you'll bring up the map menu. I first want to start with detail. If I change it from most to declutter level 1, you'll notice freeways and other similar land things are removed. This is my preferred VFR view. Now for IFR, I much preferred removing a lot more of the detail. So I'm going to touch menu and take it to declutter level 2. It's a cleaner view and it only shows me what I need for IFR. If we look at the various levels of map declutter, and I use the term declutter because it's what most people with Garmin experience are used to. If we swipe down from most, you'll see that most includes everything. If we swipe down one level, or declutter 1, it reduces a lot of the pilotage type landmarks. Level 2 gets rid of even more stuff. You'll notice that level 2 only shows airports and does not show Class B, Class Charlie airspace, VORs, NDBs. Now, it will show stuff that's in your flight plan. It just doesn't show extra stuff. This will be important in a later comment, and I'll bring it up then. But if you go all the way down, it only shows active flight plan legs, airways, and water detail. So what do I prefer? Well, when I'm doing VFR flight, I really prefer declutter 1. And when I do IFR flight, my personal preference is declutter 2. Now, if we do IFR declutter 2, you'll notice it doesn't show VORs and other intersections. That's okay. All the VORs and intersections I need are going to be on ForeFlight or Garmin Pilot, and I fly with an IFR en route map always available. Now, in my personal training, I teach you should always fly IFR on top of a VFR sectional map, but you need to know your product to very quickly go back to an IFR map in case you need to make an alteration to your clearance, which happens quite a bit. So here's the map options button, and this is what I showed. You can just touch and hold and slide to see how much detail. You can choose which data fields you want. You can touch to turn things on and off. And remember, you may have terrain or NEXRAD, terrain or radar. So you can only have terrain, NEXRAD, or radar. You can only have one of the 3 because the color coding, they'd overlay each other and you wouldn't know what's what. That's how you customize the map setup, and you can go through and individually select stuff on and off. And if you just want to go back to the factory defaults, there you go. To change the 4 basic user fields on the map, in this case, Seal Beach at the top right is the desired track of 101. The bottom left is a distance of 5.3, And in the bottom right is my procedures. If you'd like to change this, it's pretty easy. Just touch Menu, touch Change User Fields, and then touch the one you'd like to change. If we'd like to change Seal Beach to something else, we certainly can. And here are your options. I actually like leaving my next waypoint in the top left, so I'm going to touch back. I like the desired track in the top right, but let's say you want to change the procedure button in the bottom right because you're not IFR. We can change that to something else, like the nearest airport. And then we can change the distance to a data field of the wind speed and direction. This is my preferred setting for VFR pilots because it not only tells you the nearest airport, but it always tells you the speed of the wind and the direction, which may impact your glide range in an emergency. So here are the available user fields that you can choose, and it goes from active waypoint down to desired track. It's actually kind of a common error with new instructors to GPS, and they think DTK stands for direct track. No, it's the desired track. We have more user fields. The ETE to destination is actually kind of cool if you fly with kids because they always want to know how much longer, how much longer, how much longer. And you can tell them 43 minutes, 42 minutes, and so on. The ground speed I would actually display if your airspeed indicator, like your pitot system, failed, because it's always going to be different than indicated airspeed, of course. It's closer to a true speed. It's your actual ground speed. But it would be close enough in an emergency. It can tell you time to the top of descent, the trip timer. The trip timer to me doesn't mean a whole lot, but I do like wind speed and direction. And of course, if you just want nothing on your screen, you can hit the very bottom one, which is off. Now, you can also use it as a shortcut to certain functions, like the CDI indicator. I really like the generic timer control for IFR. You know, you're always told to climb and maintain this, and I'll talk more about that in the IFR address. You can even do a shortcut to a page. This is kind of cool because you're probably tired at this point of hitting the home button, back, home button, back, home button, back. This would be an easy way to do a shortcut if you're commonly looking at one of those pages. And you can scroll through and pretty much pick any page you want to look at. So I want to talk about traffic. There's 3 possible traffics on a Garmin GTN. There's TIS, TAS, and FSB. FSB is the ADS-B. FSB is what y'all talk about when you talk about ADS-B traffic. TIS. TIS stands for Traffic Information System, and you need a Mode S transponder, and you need to be on a terminal area chart, meaning you're stealing the radar from a TRACON, but it does not talk to centers. So I'll give you an example. You're in the LA Basin, you're on a terminal map, you're stealing the radar signal from SoCal Approach. Remember, a terminal area chart is controlled by terminal radar approach controllers, TRACONs. If you go to Arizona, pretty soon you're off the Los Angeles terminal chart, and there's a dead space between there and the Phoenix terminal chart, in which case you're in the LA Center area, which is only shown on sectionals. Well, now it says TIS not available. So TIS is great in highly populated areas on terminal maps. I always like normal. Only showing planes above me or only showing planes below me doesn't really do anything for me. Why would I not want to see half of the traffic? So I like normal. Unrestricted shows everybody within 50 miles, however big you got the map page up. It shows everybody at all altitudes, and they'll just clutter up the screen. You don't really need to see people 5,000 feet above you. That's why I really think the normal is the best. This is a key thing to check, especially if you fly with other partners. I was flying with a guy just a couple days ago, and I'm looking at the window in a plane, and his traffic display is only showing a guy below us. It's because somebody had been fiddling with it and had put it to below instead of normal. So always leave it at normal. Now, TAS is a little more active system. Your Garmin is actually interrogating other transponders. Well, it only works if they have a transponder. So TCAS, for the airline crew, TCAS actively looks for other airplanes and is certified to give a recommendation on what to do. Southwest will ping an Alaska Airlines. The Alaska Airlines goes go down, and Southwest says go up. And the computers make those decisions for you, and you're required to respond to the TCAS. Now, TAS is active in that it's interrogating other transponders, but there's some serious limitations. One, if the plane doesn't have a transponder, you're not going to see it. And the other one that is critical to know, and this is on TIS, TAS, and FISB traffic, TAS systems require transponders, and it's intended for advisory use only to visually acquire the traffic. Do not climb because you see a target 100 feet below you when you don't have separation on the traffic, when you don't see it. Altitudes reported can be off by a couple hundred feet. This is especially true with FISB traffic because they're showing a pressure altitude, and your altimeter is usually not set to 29 or 902. All traffic displays in all general aviation aircraft tell you where to look to find the plane. You don't make decisions solely based on what the display sees. I could absolutely turn away from traffic, but I would never execute a climb or descent without visually acquiring the contact if I could. To look at ADS-B traffic options, you can see we have multiple traffic, and if I zoom out, it keeps showing traffic in a large range. If I want to narrow that down to the people who are more concerning to me, I'm going to touch Menu, I'm going to touch Map Setup, and then I'm going to touch Traffic. Traffic range, let's bring it down to 10 nautical miles. Let's change to Alert and Advisories. Go back, and now you'll only see people that are interested to me. There is also a dedicated traffic page. If I push Home, and then push Traffic, there's my traffic page. I can zoom out, zoom in. So, maneuvering close to an airport, I like a 2 nautical mile range. Taking off, I prefer a 6 nautical mile range. And en route, I prefer 12. But let's go ahead and go Menu. You can change the motion vector from relative to absolute. So absolute motion vectors are the actual reported track and speed over the ground. If I change it back to relative, the track vectors, like that green line coming from the plus 01 target just north of my position, is relative to me. That's my preference. And you can also change the vector duration. This is where the target is projected to be in 30 seconds. This is where the target's projected to be within 5 minutes. I really prefer 1 minute to 30 seconds. Again, touching Menu, you can just change the altitude filter to normal. above, below, and unrestricted. I really prefer normal above all the others. You can see unrestricted shows so many aircraft that are just not even a conflict for me. So I really like people within a certain altitude range above and below me that are what I would consider threats or alerts. So I'm going to keep that to normal, and that's the way I normally fly it, is with those settings as well. If you want to go back to the map, remember, just press and hold home screen. So traffic alerts will also pop up on the screen if they think somebody's dangerous to you, and you'll just see it pop up. You can then see the traffic location and your own ship position. This is actually kind of important to know. Your own ship position is not the center of the little airplane icon. It's actually the nose of the aircraft. So the nose of the aircraft is where you actually are. So this traffic would be closer to 9 o'clock than 10 o'clock. Just important things to know to help you scan. Then you got two options. You can touch to go to the traffic page, which is just this, or you can close it and ignore it. So before I show you the terrain system, again, just like TAS, TIS, and ADS-B traffic are not certified for traffic avoidance, it's very important, and this is right out of the Garmin Owner's Manual, that the terrain proximity feature is only to be used as an aid for terrain avoidance. Many people are killed in the mountains every year because they don't take formal mountain training. Mountains will kill you every single time, and having a terrain system does not make you a mountain pilot. So I will show you some stuff about the terrain, but it's just like traffic. It tells you where to look outside the window. You shouldn't be relying on it. So you can choose a 360-degree ring or a 120-degree arc, which only shows you terrain in front of you. Of course, you always want to have your active flight plan displayed, and right now you'll notice it's not green, so it's turned off. You can have the legend on there. You can touch to toggle reduce protection on and off, and you can even deliberately block the safety warning system. Most people that turn off the visual and oral terrain alerts are tired of it beeping at you when you land the plane at your home airport. Yeah, that's a really bad idea. That's like not wearing your seatbelts because you're not going to have an accident today. The problem is you won't remember to put on your seatbelts when you need it. No kidding, that's a pretty apt analogy. I just want you to leave it on. I would rather it annoy you 9 trips, but save you on the 10th. And it wouldn't save you on the 10th if you deliberately turn it off. So please consider carefully before you deliberately stop or turn off a safety warning system. So here's a terrain page. If you do the 120 arc, it shows you that that's showing 7.5 miles in front of you. Look at GSL. It says 1480 feet. Well, the GSL is a GPS-derived altitude, meaning it's closer to a true altitude. You should always fly on your indicated altitude, but the GSL will actually always be a little more accurate. But it's important with flight following and IFR and VFR routes. You always fly the indicated altitude because that way everybody in the area is on the same altimeter setting. So red terrain means you're 100 feet or less or even below terrain. Yellow never means you're safe. Yellow terrain on every GPS ever made. Garmin 430, G1000, Avidyne, For flight, FlyQ, Garmin Pilot, yellow terrain has never meant you are safe. Yellow terrain means you're still going to hit something if a little bit of a mountain draft grabs your plane and pushes you down. So yellow means you need to execute a climb and turn. Red means it's an emergency climb. It's an emergency turn, an emergency diversion maneuver, which is why you all need to take a really good mountain flying class. That'll talk about what terrain type it's showing you. And there's the obstacle scale. So here's the TOS legend. And like I said, yellow doesn't mean you're safe. You could be 101 feet above terrain and see yellow. You're not safe 101 feet above mountainous terrain. Mountain downdrafts are very real, and they're much stronger than non-trained pilots realize. We'll talk about it in a minute. But here's the obstacle legend. So anything in red is just like terrain. You're 100 feet above, 10 feet above, or below. Either way, red, real bad. Yellow means you're still in danger and you need to exercise extreme caution. So just like traffic pop-ups, you can get a terrain pop-up. So you can remove the pop-up and remain on the current page. But you'll notice a terrain message is a little more urgent. It actually blinks bright red and will give you audible alerts as well if you're connected to a Garmin audio panel. So an excessive descent rate will flash pull up and will verbally say pull up. The FLTA terrain not only flashes, but it says terrain ahead, or terrain, pull up. An FLTA obstacle says the same thing, obstacle ahead. So FLTA is forward-looking terrain advisory. So it's only going to tell you about stuff in front of you. Same thing with a terrain caution. Same thing with obstacle cautions and a premature descent alert caution. So yellow, it'll flash yellow, and it'll say caution instead of pull up. That's the difference. Now, voice call out is actually an option, and what happens is it will tell you 500 feet when you're coming in to land on a runway. By the way, that's not 500 feet above minimums. That's 500 feet above the runway for us instrument pilots. An excessive descent rate will say sink rate, and a negative climb rate caution will say don't sink. So I want to talk about this excessive descent rate. Give you an example. You're at 4,000 feet above ground level, and you're descending at 1,800 feet per minute. You will not get an alert. That means you're going to impact terrain in just over 2 minutes. Is a descent rate of 1,800 feet per minute really a stabilized, safe approach? No. Give you another example. You're at 500 feet above ground level. You're descending at 1,800 feet per minute, and it says pull up. Is pulling up, pulling back on the yoke, always correct? No. If you're in a high pitch attitude in slow flight and you pull up more, you will only stall, and if you're uncoordinated, stall spin the aircraft into the ground. Pull up may be the least correct thing you can do. You may need to push the nose down with full power and retract drag-like flaps to get a positive rate of climb and airspeed. So again, this is a lot of mountain training stuff, but the pull-up thing goes back to basic private pilot. When you are at a high drag situation in slow flight, pulling up may only make things worse, especially if this goes off in a stall. And in a stall, you might approach 1,800 feet per minute. In a spin, you definitely will. So if you're in a stall or a spin and the Garmin's yelling at you, pull up, that only makes things worse. So take all of these cautions with a definite grain of salt and get some one-on-one training with this stuff. Negative climb rate's about the same. The negative climb rate after takeoff alert some people call it an altitude loss after takeoff, provides alerts when the systems determine that the aircraft is losing altitude. But that's not really true. Does a negative climb rate mean you're descending? No. If you're taking off out of Aspen at night, you're taking off into terrain that is climbing faster than your airplane can climb a lot of times. So you're getting closer to terrain because you're taking off up a canyon. Never ever fly up a mountain canyon. The only way to fly in a mountain canyon is when you're going down it or 2,000 feet above it. Flying up a mountain canyon does not work and kills a lot of people every year because the downdrafts over the ridges and the terrain just overpowers your airplane's ability to climb up. So now let's talk about terrain. If you touch menu, you'll notice that I have NextRad US on right now, and I'm going to leave that US. But watch what happens if I turn on terrain. It turns NextRad off. If I turn on radar, it turns terrain off. That's because they use similar colors and you can only view one at a time. So let's go ahead and leave terrain on. Touch back and you'll see red and yellow terrain overlaid on the topo map with our flight plan. If you want to just view the terrain page, touch home and touch terrain. That's just the terrain. We need to add some options. For instance, we can change from 360 degrees to just what's essentially in front of us. As a mountain flying instructor, I really am not a fan of this. I prefer the 360 degree view because you never know when you're going to have to do an emergency turn back. And you should never be relying on terrain features in the mountains. And a lot of people make that mistake. I do, however, like the terrain page. With 360 degrees, the flight plan, and the legend on. And what I use this for is any night takeoffs. And this is what I prefer because it gives me a second backup that my night departures can help keep me away from terrain. Remembering, of course, that again, as a mountain flying instructor, I don't recommend night flight in the mountains without a lot of training and a lot of experience in those particular mountains. And the reason I don't is this is a picture of my home airport, Big Bear Airport. Taking off blind into rising terrain, just bad. One of the rules I have when I teach mountain flying classes is you never want to do night or IFR flying in the mountains. Now everybody goes, oh, Gary, on your Facebook page, I see you land at Big Bear at night or take off at night all the time. Well, that is correct. I live there. I have hundreds of hours in that mountain valley, and I have really high standards. I need all 3 terrain systems on my airplanes working. I actually have 3 different terrain systems, and they all must be working. It must be a 75% or brighter moon, and there must be no weather. IFR in the mountains very quickly leads to ice, and night flying in the mountains is just a bad idea. So, yeah, I'll take off and land at Big Bear if it meets my criteria, but I would never land in Tahoe or Mammoth at night or IFR because I'm not that familiar with those areas. If I'm going to go to Aspen, you better believe I'm going to get a Colorado Pilots Association instructor to go with me first. If I'm a mountain flying instructor, why do I need one? Because local knowledge means everything. And I really want to reinforce this with a quote from my very good friend John Mahaney, another master flight instructor. And he says this: you need to know and understand this about mountain flying. It does not matter what ratings you have, what your experience level, hours logged, or aircraft types flown, or what you are flying, piston or turbine. Mountain flying is distinctly different. And here's the most important part. The mountain wins every time. In Aspen this year, a 20,000 hour ATP with a 30,000 hour ATP augured in and killed themselves and the passengers flying a corporate jet. 50,000 hour combined experience with ATPs in a jet augured in and killed everybody in Aspen. And on the transcript of the cockpit voice recorder, it very clearly shows they had no formal mountain training, because he actually said, wow, the winds are really bad, but maybe they'll die down in the canyon. Wind speeds never decrease in a canyon. They only increase and become rotors. So the TOS system does not replace training, as I've said. So here I am in Aspen. I've got a great GTN with TOS, and I'm going to take off direct to El Paso. Well, here's the problem, and this is why people die in Aspen all the time. Mountains don't care how much time you have, and they don't care that you're flying a turbojet or a turbofan. They don't care that you have a turbocharged whatever. The mountain downdrafts can overpower people very quickly, and night departures in the mountains are never a good idea. And this is why. If we zoom out along my flight plan, you'll notice I'm taking off into an area of terrain that only gets higher. You never take off towards higher terrain. You never ever fly up a mountain canyon, because downdrafts can quickly overpower you. The appropriate way to depart out of Aspen is to actually fly north into lowering terrain. And this is a good use of the graphical flight plan. Just right on the edge of my zoom there. The RILVOR. Zoom in, zoom in, zoom in. Zoom out. Now that is a much better flight plan for a mountain departure. Sorry, y'all, my voice is cutting out a little bit today. So, just a quick mountain lesson. Wind speeds double going over a sharp mountain ridge for the same reason that wind speeds go up when they go over the rounded part of your wing. But it's a much sharper ridge, so they increase in speed much, much faster. A wind always doubles in speed, and each knot of wind is 50 foot per minute. So if there's a 10 knot wind aloft, that seems pretty mild, but a 10 knot wind doubles to 20, which makes it 1,000 foot per minute downdraft. It is not uncommon at all in mountain canyons to have downdrafts that exceed 2,000 feet per minute. That's why I've said it so many times, and I'll leave you alone after this one. The thing that climbs at 2,000 feet per minute may not climb at all if it hits one of those mountain ridge downdrafts. So let's go on to FSB weather, and this is what people think of when they say ADSB weather. The menu, you can turn on as many things as you like. You can turn NextRad on, off, and you can select US, Canada. And you can touch as many keys as you want to overlay the map. So on the map overlay right now, we have METAR, PIREP, winds and temperature aloft, SIGMETs, AIRMETs, and the legend with a track up display. I always like track up for all of my flying. I want something on the map on my left to be off my left wing. I want something on the right to be off my right wing. Now, if you're an older pilot or you had an older flight instructor who taught you never ever turn the sectional map, and it just upsets you if you're looking at anything except north up, you can always set it to north up. But I really do prefer track up for my personal preferences. connects weather, which is internet weather through an Iridium satellite phone, Iridium data, or XM. You can see how it on, off. You can set the region of coverage, the data request, and the status of the data link. Again, orientation is, like I said, I prefer track up. And the legend. I always like the legend on for weather and radar. So there's some different keys on radar if you're not familiar with radar. Turbulence detection turns turbulence detection on and off. GCS is a ground clutter suppression. It helps distinguish weather from terrain and ground clutter stuff like buildings and towers. The problem is if you turn that on, now you're not seeing that. So radar was actually the original terrain system that pilots used because they can tilt the antenna down or nose level and actually see terrain in front of them. So radar was kind of actually the first terrain system ever used. ACT does something called altitude compensated tilt. Watch shading is an option, weather alerts, and stabilize. But there's a couple important things you need to know. The ground clutter suppression and turbulence detection only works if you have a radar dish 12 inches or bigger. So if you got a little 9-inch antenna, those won't work. And turbulence detection is only supported from your point out to 40 miles. And if you zoom out more than 160 nautical miles, it completely turns off. So turbulence detection only works for 40 miles. That's the takeaway for that. And this is kind of what it looks like. So you see I've only got a 40-degree sector. Again, I want to see everything. Just like terrain, I don't want to see just a little chunk. I want to see all the terrain. So this is a full sector scan. And look, you see some lot more serious weather. So the watch thing actually is kind of cool because it shows area where the radar's dissipating, and that can help you figure out where hidden or embedded thunderstorms are. So that's kind of a cool trick. XM weather is useful because it can show you current weather anywhere in the country versus FISB, what most people think of as ADS-B weather, only shows you within a certain radius, usually 400 miles of your current position. So if you're flying a citation, XM might be the way to go. It is pretty possible to just over-clutter the screen. So let's start taking things off and look at stuff one at a time. So let's get rid of lightning, METARs, PIREPs, freezing levels, SIGMETs, AIRMETs, winds aloft, and counting warnings. And now let's go back, and you can see, if we put up the legend for you, you can see there's some ice and a mix of rain and snow up top. You can see yellow, orange, and green precipitation. Remember, read it like a stoplight. Green means go, yellow means think about it, red not so much, and ice is always bad for most GA airplanes. So let's put things on one at a time. Let's turn off the next red, and let's put on a weather forecast. Current, back, and I can touch any symbol and bring up the current weather forecast for that city. We'll go menu. Get rid of our forecast and just look for lightning. You can see the strikes. If we get rid of lightning, we can put up echo tops. And you can see the brighter the light, the higher the cloud tops are, which is a very good sign of convection. So let's go menu, cloud tops. Same thing. Echo is precip. cloud tops are not. Menu. Let's look at some METARs. And you can touch any METAR you want. There we go. Cell movements. You can see the direction they're moving and the speed. Air reps and pi reps. You can just touch the dot, pull up the pi rep. So this is an urgent pi rep because it says UUA, 10 miles south of the GPT VOR at 1649 at 8,000. A Cirrus said the turbulence was moderate to extreme. County warnings. County warnings I actually like, and I think it's an underused thing. County warnings are pretty useful because you're going into that area. If your plane's going to be on the ground for several days, you might be worried about flooding or other county warnings. Winds aloft. Airmets and SIGMETs. And again, you can touch any one of them to pull them up. Freezing level. So you can see this one right here is at 18,000 feet. Icing. And we'll zoom out and see if we find some icing. Doesn't look like a whole lot. Turbulence. Cyclones. And of course, I always leave the legend on. FSB weather is very similar to XM weather, but just with less options. And it typically covers a smaller area. For instance, you'll notice on the next red button, I can change it from the continental United States to just the regional weather, which is a much smaller area. I can do combined or just the continental United States. I always leave it combined. So I do want to take a couple minutes to talk about some common misconceptions. Any weather that you get, whether it's through the Iridium data system, XM, or ADS-B, they're never real-time weather. There's always a delay. With ADS-B, you could have a 7 to 10 minute delay from the radar just to the ADS-B tower. Then there's another delay in getting it to your airplane. So when you see a weather age on a traffic display, that's how old it was when it got to the tower. It may have been 15 or 20 minutes before it got to you. Thunderstorms move 20 knots, no problem at all. They vertical develop up to 4,000 feet per minute, and thunderstorm displays on ADS-B, XM, and, well, any internet data can be up to 28 minutes old. So never, ever use a weather display for traffic avoidance. There was a poor guy in Bakersfield that was using an iPad to go between thunderstorms. Well, the hail that hit his plane was over a half inch, broke out the windows, critically injured his wife with head injuries, pretty much totaled the plane. He was able to make an emergency land at Bakersfield. His wife went to the hospital in critical condition. She survived and she's better now. His daughter in the back was injured, and he was standing there shaking, while his wife's being carted away in an ambulance, holding the compress on his bloody head, talking to an FBO line person, showing him the iPad and go, there's no thunderstorms, and then they popped up. Never ever use weather data to make decisions. Seeing green dots doesn't mean that you'll be able to get there VFR. Never ever try and navigate a thunderstorm in a GA airplane using this stuff. The only real-time weather is looking outside the window, a current PIREP, or having the radar. So, true story, I was a captain on a Cessna Caravan for a private airline, and the owner, when he bought the Caravan, said, I'm going to spend, I don't know, however much money, and I'm going to put radar in the plane. I go, you don't need it. He goes, yeah, but if we have radar, we can go, we can avoid thunderstorms. Y'all, a Cessna Caravan has a ground airspeed about 170 knots on a good day, going downhill. If you think I need weather current to dodge thunderstorms at 170 knots, you got to get yourself a new pilot. And he goes, yeah, but XM weather can be up to 28 minutes old. I go, yeah. And if I'm ever within 28 minutes of a thunderstorm, again, you need to fire me and get a new pilot. Radar's great if you're screaming along at 300 knots. Anything under that, long-range planning only. It helps you make decisions on stopping before you get into areas. But it does not replace the legally required standard weather brief that you must get before every flight leaving the traffic pattern area of your home airport. So we have some cool phone services. You can pair an Apple mobile device running Garmin Pilot to your GTN using a Flightstream 210 or 510. You can get an optional GSR data link and actually access text and voice services in flight and on the ground using Iridium phones. So, before I take off into rising terrain at night out of Aspen, I should probably text my wife that I am going to be late if I make it home at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push home, and I'm going to push services. I'm going to send a text, and I'm going to hit compose. And I'm going to put to a phone number, 657-230-7230. No, I'm actually going to change that. Instead of texting my wife, I'm just going to text Jenny. And if any of you are over 30, you'll know Jenny's phone number is 867-5209. You either get that or you don't. So I'm going to text her, and I'm going to say, taking off now. Hit enter and hit send. This is actually kind of a cool feature, especially if you're in an area where you can't get flight following immediately. You can notify somebody that you're taking off and they can look out for you. And if you don't land at an expected time, then they can, do something about it. The other cool thing you can do is you can always use your phone to call FBOs, tell them you're on your way, that kind of stuff. And it's a great division, especially if you can have the co-pilot call the FBO and say, I'm 35 minutes out and we'll need fuel and a quick turn. Now, I just realized this is probably why I should never record DVDs with a little bit of a cold. Jenny's number is actually 867-5309. Sorry about that. So I only want to talk about two of the utilities. VCalc, trip planning, fuel planning, density altitude, true airspeed winds, rain prediction, flight timers. We're actually going to talk about all those in the upcoming VFR flying chapter. So the clean screen is really easy to use, and it's just designed so you can clean the fingerprints off the screen without triggering anything. So before your flight, if your screen's all covered in fingerprints, you just hit clean screen, and now nothing you do, like rubbing off fingerprints, will trigger a screen. Then you just push the home button once to exit. Really critically important, never ever use any spray chemicals to clean the screen of your GTN. You really just need to use just plain clean water on a very soft microfiber or cotton cloth. Any chemical cleaning agents can damage the screen and will void your warranty. Especially anything with ammonia will just destroy that touch screen. So please be really careful. The other utility that's important for everyone is to set up some scheduled messages. So if I touch scheduled messages, and then I'm going to create one. I'm going to create check fuel. And enter that. I don't want it one time, I want it periodic. And I want it every 003000. I want it every 30 minutes. Even if your airplane has a both tank switch, like Cessna 172 or Cessna 182, you run both tanks. It's important that you always put in the check fuel for every 30 minutes. For planes like my Cessna 206, which can run the left tank or the right tank, but never both, and for most low-wing planes, you can run left tank or right tank, but never both, it's important that you switch fuel tanks every 30 minutes. But that's not really true. You just want to check the fuel levels, and you may need, it depends on your power consumption for any phase of flight. So why do I say it's important for even high wings that run both tanks continuously? Because it reminds you to check the fuel gauges. Now we know that fuel gauges aren't ever accurate, except at the factory when they're jacked to a level position and reading empty. But you shouldn't rely on the fuel gauges. You should always know what the fuel gauges in your airplane does. So if you take off and both tanks read full, and you get a check fuel alert 30 minutes after takeoff, and one tank says half and one tank says almost empty, somebody didn't put the fuel caps back on, and you can declare an emergency and land. If they seem to be acting differently than what you expect, that's a good clue. So that's why I think everybody should do 30 minutes. We could create another one, and we could say oil change. Now, a lot of airplanes do an oil change every 50 hours takt time, which is different than real time. It's the revolutions per minute in the engine. So takt time is slower than actual time, or like a Hobbs meter would be. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this an event, and we'll say, let's do it in 6 months. So December's 1 month, January, February, March, April, May, on the same date is 6 months. So I can then put in on May 14th, if I haven't done an oil change and it's been 6 months, it's time to do an oil change. You could also use an event like an annual inspection. Or if you wanted, you can change the oil change to actual hours. So we can do a one-time thing. But remember, takt time is slower than Hobbs time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 75 hours in. And it says, no, you can't do that. The most you can do is 24 hours. So that's why I made it an event and set a date. Okay, let's look at the systems page. System status should be done as part of every pre-flight before you go. It just shows you that the databases are current. If there are any standby databases. So a standby database is something you can preload. If you know you're going to get a database change in 4 days, you can put it on the card, and that's a standby database, and it will only go to that when the date matches. We'll go back. GPS status. Of course, you need 5 good satellites to get a 3D position. And, as we're simulating, we've got them all. Cool tip for instructors. Hey, instructors, if you want to train somebody in the difference between LPV and LNAV only, if you touch SBOS and then you disable WAS, they will not get vertical guidance, and they'll have to go back to LNAV when they're not expecting it. So let's turn that back on. Back. Oh, sorry, went too far. External LRUs, these are all the line replaceable units. If you're a G1000 pilot, you're familiar with it. It's all the add-ons. It's all the would you like fries stuff that you can buy with a GTN. A Garmin data link, either a 69 or 88. A Garmin audio panel. The GSR is the Iridium connection, and the GTX is a transponder. GWX is the weather connection. So all of them are apparently broken because we're just looking at simulator. We'll go back. Setup. CDI scale, I like auto because it automatically zooms in or out for you. I do like a minimum runway length for us fixed wing pilots of 1,000 feet. Now, a lot of people say, well, 1,000 feet is too short for my airplane. In an emergency, it's better to go off the end of the runway into a fence than it is to stall spin into a mountain. ILS CDI switch. This is very, very important. You should always leave it on auto switch. What that does, and we'll talk about it in the instrument chapter as well, is it will automatically switch from GPS to VLOC to track a localizer when you're a certain distance outside final. Let's go ahead and put in the local offset. I'm in California, so I want to do -8. So I'm going to push -8, 0, 0, -8 hours, enter, and that's correct. It is 1909 on November 13th. I still like the Zulu time, but you can always do local 24-hour as well. COM channel spacing, everybody in the US should always have 25. In Europe and certain other countries, they use 8.33, but US pilots should always leave it on 25. And look at the COM frequency. See where it says 133.07? We want to have reverse frequency lookup. And when it gets smaller, you'll actually see those frequencies change. So if I put in 133.0 and transfer it, you'll then see Long Beach ground pop up. Okay, let's continue with alerts. Now, these alerts are really helpful for VFR pilots. Please remember the GTN, it's an amazing appliance, but it does not replace flight planning. So your GPS is much more accurate than FAA radar. That's why I have 500 feet as an altitude buffer instead of the default 200. If FAA radar shows you in violation of the airspace, even though you're 201 feet above it, you're still going to have to explain yourself to the FAA. That's why I always like, instead of the default 200, I prefer 500. Now, and also nice is an arrival alert. An arrival alert is great because it can trigger your memory to do a descent checklist, something like that. So what we can do is we can touch arrival, and depending on the speed of your plane, we might say 20 miles out, That way, 20 miles before you get to your destination, you'll get an arrival alert, which can trigger you into doing a descent and an arrival checklist. Now, when I'm flying IFR, I actually turn off my Class B, my Class Charlie, my Class Delta, because I don't need them. I'm IFR. I'm automatically cleared through Bravo, Charlie, and Delta. Now, I'm automatically cleared through a restricted area if they give me the clearance, but I can still just pay attention and ask. Same thing about a MOA. You are automatically cleared through a MOA if your clearance allows you, but in Central California, even on an IFR clearance, excuse me, that takes you through a MOA, they will still actually vector you around it if it's active because they're doing high-speed jet training. So I like restricted MOA and other on just to keep me aware, give me a better situational awareness. If I go back, units, pretty standard. You know, most U.S. pilots will use feet, nautical miles, gallons, but jet and turbine pilots actually prefer fuel in pounds because that's how the POHs work, and that's even how we kind of buy fuel. We convert it back to gallons. But everything jet and turbine pilots, we do things in pounds. So we'll put it back to gallons because we're in my little Cessna 206. You always want magnetic in the lower US. We'll hit back. And lat long is fine, but you can change it to different formats if you fly out of the United States. Pressure inches of mercury, and I really like temperature in Celsius. We're aviation professionals. We should all know and use Celsius, not Fahrenheit at this point. So let's go back. Audio. Basically, you're just saying how loud things like clicks happen. Backlight. This is if you manually want to dim the backlight of the system. So most GTNs, when they're installed, are attached to the dim bus, or they can use that light sensor right there to automatically dim. It depends how they're set up and installed. But if you manually want to turn it up brighter or make it darker, if you want to make it brighter, you touch this. If you want to make it darker, you touch that. Or you can manually just get darker and brighter here. And that's really all of the system that we want to cover today. So I hope you've enjoyed it. How do you get better at this stuff? Go through the pilot's guide. And I really mean go through it with a highlighter, big red pen, post-it notes. You got to see my POHs. They are marked up more than there's white space. Don't forget you can use the free simulator, which you can download for any Apple iPad from the iTunes store. You can always go on over to pilotsafety.org and click on either Garmin or Ask the Expert and send me a quick question. And if you really want to be great and you really want to touch up your IFR skills and know how to work everything, especially in an emergency, head on over to Master Flight Training. Have me come out and torture you. Your airplane, your airport, lots of fun, 3 very long days, and we'll just get a ton of stuff done. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something, and I will see you on Chapter 3, VFR Flying.